Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We spent 2 days talking about people, priorities, and platforms in the new environments. And my task is to help us make sense of that dialogue over the last 2 days. And to help me do that, I'm joined by 3 esteemed IT executives and an academic. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start with the issue. We've heard from Peter there, David, about the need to re-platform. And yet you told me it's not about technology, it's about people. So where's Peter getting it wrong?
Peter's still on, so I can't possibly say he's getting it wrong. I think it's about where you start from. It's not about whether you need to re-platform. It's actually about where you start the process from and thinking outside in rather than what a lot of organizations do, which think about the inside out view of the world and pushing what we think is the best way to do things on people rather than actually understanding what people's needs are and pulling those in that then drive whatever the capabilities that you need to support that. So I'm not going to disagree with you or my esteemed academic colleague here, but I think it's just about where you start from and what your focus is, what you're really trying to achieve.
Donna, we had a strong talk about change management and the challenges of making things happen in a business. What's your thoughts about this?
I'm very much an advocate for platform models. One of the aspects that's key in this is the people, is the mindset shift. The organisation needs to understand the change in business strategy and the change in operating models that sort of sit around that. And there's a lot of change management or people, culture, business alliances, etc., that needs to change to support the success of the technical change. And I think that's when you don't look at one or the other, you have to look at them together because it is an ecosystem.
Yeah. Vishy, you were talking to me, actually, you were saying there's 2 things. How much of this material we've just had presented is pre-COVID and how the world has changed post-COVID. You said about a CFO who won't entertain any cost discussion. How do you evolve and change platforms when the business leaders won't spend any money?
Yeah, good question. I think, look, if you look at a big event last week was the federal budget, right? So if you start from there and you look at what are the core priorities that we are going to invest in to get out of this pandemic fueled by growth? I think that's the first thing, is growth is the way out of this, and it's a pretty challenging concept when everyone's trying to do just protection, right? They're just trying to survive, and how do you grow in that market? So for me, I think it's positioning technology investments in the context of business recovery and growth is absolutely paramount. And then technology, people, change management, all those other things are part of it. But very often I find that the conversation becomes too much about technology and not enough about what the technology will achieve. And especially now, that's the conversation CFOs want to entertain is, what does this give me when? And is this a short term, is it medium term? Not a lot of chat about long term, but it's short and medium term at this stage.
Peter, you're seeing successful organizations who have done this replatforming and got an improvement from it. How have they been able to think long term when most of us are caught up in short term horizons?
Great question. The companies that I work with fall neatly into 2 categories. One is, my hair's on fire, we have to cut costs, we're not doing anything new. Or, hey, it's bad and we need to cut costs, but this is a chance to create the company we've always wanted to operate, that we've never been able to. You get a free pass right now to make changes post-COVID. And so this is a great opportunity to not waste it. But I would just, let me comment on this people technology thing. I just don't buy it. I think they're all together. There's no such thing as separate people and separate technology. Organizations are a combination of those things, and talking about them separately makes no sense to me. What makes sense is, how will our people work differently, and what tools do they need, and what is our business model that we're trying to achieve? And I don't buy that it's all about the people. I buy that it's all about all the pieces fitting together nicely.
But sure.
And
But surely
Sorry,
the thing
do you want me
is,
to keep going? No.
people are animate objects, technology is inanimate. People have emotions, people have threats, people have fears, people have aspirations. You can't just bulldoze those out of the way and try to make change, because you're going to get resistance.
But I'm not saying that, actually, Peter, you are. I'm saying that we have to consider the whole set together in a much more integrated way. I wish we would stop talking about IT in the business. I wish we would stop talking about technology and people. I think that together we create these new enterprises. Of course, they're led by people. Of course, people are the core asset. But the way we operate in digital partnering today, there are not people involved in every transaction anymore. The people design those transactions, but you think of a company like PayPal, they are doing an automated set of transactions. Now, people run it and people make the changes, of course, but it's a much more integrated, holistic model than that I grew up with.
Yeah, but most of people's background here is in technology, so that's our comfort zone. We're talking here about the need for HR and IT to work together. David, you talked to me about some of the conflicts that exist over IT people, pay scales, that sort of type of stuff. How do you get others to collaborate on these change with you?
Well, I think to Vishy's point, this is about making smart investment decisions about how an organization is going to position itself to take advantage of the new markets that are appearing in front of us. And if you start looking at things in terms of investment decisions rather than cost decisions, that changes the narrative around what you're trying to achieve, and it allows you to actually understand the value of what you're investing in. If those are people that happen to cost more than a person in another part of the organization, well, then that's justified on that investment, as opposed to just looking at individual cost elements across the board.
Okay, well, Donna, you were talking about some observation you made of Regeneron. So they've obviously influenced Donald Trump in his thinking, and you passed on to me some Trumpian advice about the need for CIOs to manage down rather than up sometimes.
I don't think I'll ever give you Trumpian advice. It's certainly not my persuasion. But anyway, I think what I was referring to is that back in 2014, Regeneron sort of looked at the AI around the right capabilities to bring together for personnel to have more successful sort of outcomes. So I thought, that was very early in AI, and to apply it into people, I think we're still quite naive in using analytics in people decisions and people change, etc. And I think there's a lot more opportunity to sort of come out with that. I mean, talking about me being I'm a technologist, but I do spend a lot of my time in thinking about that whole ecosystem model and how all the different parts come together, and spend most of my time in those discussions with the business and with the board and executives around, and my own teams around that sort of change and how that mindset's changing, and how the technology will underpin that, but it alone is never the answer. You need to be able to really thrive in the business operating model to take advantage of that, and that opens a lot more of the doors. And you need to be able to partner internally and externally to be able to do that.
Okay. Peter, Ziff Davis ranked you the 24th most influential man in IT. I've seen your research over the last 3 years, and it seems to make a similar message. Why is that message, given your influence, why is that message not getting greater traction?
Peter, firstly, not men, and we're men and women. And secondly, I'm not sure how you measure my message isn't getting traction, but I will tell you that I am seeing more change in organizations in the COVID period than I've seen in the 5 years before. And the message is simple. We have to find new ways to make money and to meet our social purpose as enterprises, and that's going to be different. And that's why I think the whole question of technology and replatforming and the way people will work is all changing. So, I'm sorry you don't see the impact from what we do, but we do. And I think we're seeing it in this room. I think the leaders you have in your room are making great changes to Australian companies.
Okay, I think people are saying, though, that the investments we've made in technology over the last few years have blossomed because we couldn't have functioned without technology. Does that give us, or should we be empowered by that to be more vocal in the business, or is that not our true voice?
If there's one truth over the last 6 months, and there's a lot of noise, but one truth is a lot of businesses have survived because of technology, right? And they've been able to re-platform, at least survive, if not blossom. So the question for me is, are the technology leaders actually utilizing that as an opportunity to have more productive conversations with their executives, with their boards, in terms of, it's not just a survival thing. How do we actually then use this to become the future? It's the future of work, or how are we going to re-platform this? And I think those require some fairly bold conversations. So I agree with the point Donna made around, it's not just about managing up or down. It's actually being confident in the role of a technologist. I also don't believe in this business technology thing. I think what Peter said, I 100% agree. The question is, how do you build technology to not be this thing that's the back office? How do you actually make that the engine room of a business? And a lot of businesses here are already well underway into that. How do you use this opportunity to turbocharge that and to actually drive a business on which technology is the core platform and digitization is the core platform? I think that's the key challenge, but also opportunity ahead of all of us in this space.
David, retail, obviously a challenging environment, in this. You've had all the supply chain issues that have gone on during COVID. Prominence that's gathered for you on that. How has that given you ammunition to prosecute arguments?
Yeah, I mean, the great toilet paper crisis of 2020 I think has allowed us to really show how we can adapt to different situations in the world as an organization, and technology is just one part of the organization. I mean, joking aside, we had to open a new distribution center just to handle toilet paper. And that would have taken us months, if not years, prior to COVID. We did that in a matter of 2 weeks, acquiring property, starting the thing, running it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's the coincidence then of everybody coming together and technology just being part of that actually demonstrates how we as an enterprise can actually address the needs of in this case, the Australian population in a better way when we come together, rather than when we think of things as divided pieces of an enterprise. So it's not so much about, does it raise our voice? It's actually more about us all as executives realizing that we actually work better together. Yeah. And we can do great things if we actually do all work together.
How do we make sure, though, that we maintain the opportunities that have been presented by that, the relationships that we've built, Donna, in the sense that we're dealing with a crisis, now we've got to actually get back to a new normal?
I think future ready is really, you get some catalysts through shocks like that, but it's back in sort of normal business that really defines a company being future ready or not, and that's because they're embedding that sort of change. For the C-level suite, I think it's about having context. If you can be relevant in every aspect of the business, regardless of the stage or the issues that are facing that business, that's when you have a voice. And whether you're loud or not, you don't just need to be the sky is falling, listen to me. You actually need to know how to interpret the signals versus the noise, and you need to be able to apply your intelligence and context and so on to help the business see how might we move forward and grow the business.
But how can IT not be relevant in a 21st century organization? It's surely, if you turned it off, it wouldn't function. So surely that should give us greater voice.
I think there's two points there. Technology is relevant. Somebody's asked me to do a digital strategy, and I said, no, there's a business strategy that has to operate in a digital world, right? There's no separation of that. I think we're talking about who are the leaders that sort of want to be able to have a voice at the table. So technology in itself, I think, is understood. But the voice you need to have is be able to present with business acumen with the right context to understand how the business can grow. And also you need to have, influence in to be able to sort of, move that direction. Otherwise it's technology for technology's sake. It's a little bit of a theory, but to really make it happen is have your voice and influence based in appropriate sort of, context for the time.
Okay, Scott Farquhar yesterday, Peter, said CIOs have an incredible opportunity to add value to the business. How would you argue that they should do that?
Well, I think his company is a great example of a platform. I would say that the answer that you all gave to the percent of your executive team that's digitally savvy is the place to start. Yeah. If your answer was 10% or 20, the average was 30 something, that is an incredibly important role. And Donna and I have worked together with several of her executive teams she's been part of to do that. And so it's the role of the technology lead is in part to educate the board and the executive team about what's possible, what it costs, what will have to change to get there. So I think that role is number one. And that really is the ultimate seat at the table. So I would start with that. I would also start with breaking down the barriers between IT, business, partners. I think those are now going away, and post-COVID, I hope we don't come back to it. So how do we do it? Well, the example I gave at the very end of DBS, I think is one approach, which is to say, we'll reorganize the company around these platforms and they'll be jointly owned, two-in-a-box governance by a technologist and a leader, a banking leader. And there are many versions of that we see across the globe, but I think they're the things that make a big difference. So 4 things I think you can focus on. The first is improving the digital savvy of your colleagues. The second is creating a platform mindset. The third is new ways of working. How do we operate in a different way? And fourth is, what do we have to change the organizational structure to be more designed for being future ready?
Vishy, you spent a lot of time on the future of work, and yet you also have a digital savvy program for your team, and you've said you've evolved that in some ways. You've focused on a broader perspective of that. What's that?
Yeah, so let me start off by saying I 100% agree with everything Peter just said there, just to balance it out, the 4 things. So the digital savvy program, so we have this concept called digital fitness. So it's an app that we made available for everyone, which gives you a score across 4 things: your skill set, your mindset, your relationships, and your behaviors. And we gamified it. And being a bunch of accountants, we love scorecards and we love leaderboards. So that's how we started our journey. But that in itself didn't start the whole revolution, I would say. We've actually given people access to the tools. So I would say it's a bit more than education, it's experience. So you want people to actually have experience with digital and technology, not just education. And what we've done is we've actually given democratized data and technology for our entire workforce, 8,000 strong workforce. We then created platforms where they can work safely and securely, because cybersecurity is a big part of that. And the last is we actually created a marketplace for people to share their automation. We call it Digital Lab, where people actually get rewarded for any automations that they create. So it's not just for them and their teams, and they actually get noticed. There's a leaderboard. So that's on the digital skilling journey. For me, the future of work, very quickly, the reason is we have an obligation, right? Clients come to us and they say, we want you to advise us on this. Now, it's not a tax matter, it's not an audit matter. When it comes to future of work, it's all of the above. So we have a 9,000 strong workforce. So we actually decided, let's try it on ourselves very quickly first, get the data, and start learning from that. So when we go and talk to customers, it's not based on theory. It's actually based on, because we've got 9,000 people, the average age of a PwC employee is 26. So we've got demographics that start from fairly young to fairly senior partners. So we said, let's use the data, let's use the example from what we're doing. And it's not just remote working. Remote working is a very small component of the future of work. It's going to be hybrid. I think we heard that yesterday, right? It's hybrid, not just with each other, with your clients, the social aspect. What's the role of the real estate then? when you come into the office. So we're trying to grapple with all of those things, I'm sure we all, and we're just trying to run slightly quicker so we can actually have the data when we talk to clients.
David, we were talking about interactions with the board and the need to actually confront them with risks and problems and issues, not gloss over some of the challenges of making it work. Can you share what your thoughts there are?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be totally transparent with the board and bring them on the journey of actually understanding what cyber risk, for instance, looks like. What are the risks in the re-platforming or whatever other activities you have underway? I think too often we try and make everything sound like it's wonderful and easy because we think that's how we get investment and how we get the board to come on the journey with us. But actually, it's exactly the opposite. It's keeping them, it's bringing them into the picture. It's actually taking them on the journey and making sure that they understand the risks and the rewards of all the decisions we're going to make, so they can make really good, informed decisions and actually help us to achieve, as opposed to just being somebody that we try and tell a story to once every time they get together.
But isn't that a bit simplistic? I mean, some of the challenges of IT and transformation and all that are deep technical challenges. Peter's talking about APIs and stuff like that. The really sort of senior executives on the board need to have a really understanding of what that entails. How do you have that dialogue with people on issues that are fairly complex?
Well, I mean, you can't do that with techie speak, but it's about education, though. It's about people understanding the capabilities that you're talking about and what outcomes those capabilities are going to drive and how do you derive value out of those outcomes, but also the risk side of that equation. And attaching board members to these things. So the biggest initiative that we've got underway at the moment, we've got a member of the board who's actually part of that program and is embedded in the program and will follow along with the program the whole way through. So the board feel they've got a voice every day, not just when I go and do the report.
But how does that work in practice? Let me guess that the board member has sort of got 4 other board positions, extremely busy person. How do you keep their attention from on that journey?
Well, it's the same as everybody else. It's about building that relationship in the first place and then actually making this a valuable thing that they actually want to be part of, and then they make the time for it. Yes, there's compromise to be made because of course they're on other boards that they have to worry about, but they engage quite heavily in it because they understand the importance of it and they actually want to be part of it because it's part of their education and learning as well and helping them to be better on some of the other boards that they're on.
Okay. Donna, you talked to me about having risk. Doing nothing is a risk in itself, and you've got to actually articulate to people that actually that's not really a decision you can make that comes without a cost. Right. Could you explain your thinking there?
Well, I think it goes in with any of the initiatives and so on. Whether you're doing something or the risk of not doing something, you need to be able to articulate it in the context of the business strategy, in the context of the business risk appetite, and help them understand the strategic play as well as the operational delivery risks. So there's sort of a number of sort of aspects that sort of sit around that. And as a CIO, if you can articulate it in that context, I think you get a lot more sort of buy-in to the approach and what you're sort of saying, and also a much better understanding of the risks versus the rewards, but also what mitigations, what are we actually asking of the board to either accept or provide us with some permission to do something. I think clearly sort of articulating, if we're sitting sort of up here on a risk profile, what is it going to cost or take in order to reduce that risk, and be much more open and transparent around those movements. I think you get a much more healthier sort of debate and discussion and testing of those assumptions. And I think everybody comes out of it with the right sort of conclusion on how much risk are we prepared to take versus how much do we want to sort of batten down. And I think it's about having a conversation again in business acumen sort of levels, back to the business strategy with the risk appetite conversation that the board has. I think any board member that's sitting on a project board needs to act still as a board member. They need to sort of test and understand those assumptions that are being applied.
Okay.
I think just to add to, I think the worst thing that can ever happen to you is you go to a board meeting, you talk about an initiative, and they just say, well, if you say so.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
You've got to get them to be engaged.
Yep.
So you need conflict.
It's not conflict, but you need them to be engaged in the discussion, in the arguments, and really understand what it is that you're asking for and what that journey is going to look like.
Aren't they engaged in this discussion, though, because they've got doubts in their mind, they've got question marks, they've got things that are probing at you? Isn't that really
Which is great.
Yeah.
But they need tools, Peter. That's what we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
They need tools to be able to make those judgments. And I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is to provide dashboards and other tools for boards to make informed decisions. And I disagree about the conflict. I think that's way overrated. I think that in the end, it's about working together, and the boards that have the most effective impact are the ones that, take a business model perspective rather than a project perspective.
That's
right.
In fact, statistically, we find all those traffic light presentations that are done to boards have very little value in the long run. Because by the time you've got a red traffic light, you're already fixing it. It's the question Donna mentioned of, what aren't we doing? Is the business model at risk rather than the project?
Okay. Peter, a question I've got for you. We've spoken people, we've spoken platforms. Other thing in the invite for the agenda was priorities. What do you see as the priorities that people should have?
Well, I think prioritization is the hardest issue right now because there's so many things that companies can do. And one of the biggest challenges is stopping things that are marginal. And so I think one of the things everyone in this room has to be much better at is saying, hey, this is a great idea, but it's not going to move the needle. So how do we prioritize to the things that are really going to move the needle? And they're different in every company because every company is different. But I will tell you for sure that the business model, the way you make money will change, and that has to be the number one priority.
Yep.
And therefore, as you pointed out, the role of all of the components, particularly the people who are going to lead this organization. So for me, prioritization is about getting rid of stuff that have marginal value and really getting everyone's attention on the big things. And I still don't see that at the sort of A+ level yet.
Okay. And Donna, you also said to me, you were concerned that Australia is lagging quite a lot in this area.
Yeah, I think what I see, and some of the data that comes out of Peter's work is showing that only 3% of Australian companies are future ready. And so that we need to sort of really stare into that and understand what are the components and the capabilities and the discussions and debates and the enablers that are actually going to help us move that curve.
Okay, anything you want to add, David or Vishy?
Look, I agree with all of that. I think prioritization is absolutely the key. Picking the right things to back are the things that are really going to prepare you for whatever that world is, right? You've got to prepare to be agile, flexible, resilient, all those words that have been used lots of times over the last 2 days. You can't be definitive about exactly what is going to work and what isn't going to work. So picking the priorities that create that world for your enterprise are the things that you need to focus on.
Vishy, you got the final word.
Yeah, I'd probably say the risk versus reward mechanism is going to be very different going forward. So the amount of risk people take versus the reward you get for it is fundamentally, and we haven't talked enough about risk because there's a traditional aspect of risk and then there's a growth aspect of risk. And I think that's what we're staring into is what does the risk versus reward look like and what is the role of technology, people, process and other things in enabling that risk versus reward for the new business model. That's, to me, in a nutshell, what we have to try and achieve.
Well, I'd like to thank my 4 esteemed colleagues for this presentation and their thoughts and opinions, so thank you.